Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking a plunge into, well, a really fascinating and honestly quite debated story from Catholic history.
We are. It's about Pope Leo XIII, an alleged vision he had back in 1884, and this intense narrative that grew up around it, something about a potential deal or maybe allowance given to the forces of evil.
It sounds like something out of a movie, but it's rooted in some historical accounts mixed with maybe some legend. It definitely continues to provoke discussion.
It really does. It sits right at that crossroads of, historical event and maybe religious folklore.
Exactly. So you've shared some sources with us, and our mission today is basically to unpack those. We want to pull out the key insights.
Right. We'll look at who Pope Leo XIII actually was, what supposedly happened on that specific day.
The content of the vision itself, though, importantly, as it's been passed down, right, through secondhand accounts mostly.
Yes, that's a crucial distinction. And then the prayer that came out of it, the prayer to St. Michael, and how people have tried to make sense of this whole thing over the years.
Yeah, from seeing it as like a prophecy of the 20th century's chaos to maybe viewing it more as a symbolic story.
So our goal is to help you sort through the historical context, understand the different viewpoints in these accounts, and maybe see why this story, and especially that prayer, still resonates.
Okay, sounds good. Let's get started then. Pope Leo XIII. Where do we even begin? What do the sources tell us about him?
Well, the sources paint him as a pretty significant figure. He was pope for a very long time, 1878 to 1903. That's quite a reign.
Long time.
And he was known for being highly intellectual, very skilled in diplomacy, which was needed then. And he issued some really major social teachings. People often mention Rerum Novarum.
Ah, yes, the encyclical on the rights of workers. Groundbreaking stuff for its time.
Definitely. And he lived to be 93, one of the oldest popes ever.
Wow. And the sources also mention, interestingly, his focus on spiritual warfare, the rosary, themes that seem, well, quite relevant to this vision story.
Very relevant. It was a time, when the church felt it was facing big challenges from a more secular world. He seemed very aware of those spiritual pressures.
Which brings us, I guess, to the event itself. October 13th, 1884. At the Vatican, what happened?
So the story goes, according to these sources, it was right after he finished celebrating morning mass.
Okay.
And the descriptions we have, mostly from clergy who are supposedly there or nearby, they're quite dramatic. They say Pope Leo just stopped suddenly.
How?
Like he went into some kind of trance. His face apparently went pale. He looked horrified, or at least deeply disturbed. And this lasted for several minutes.
That must have been alarming to witness.
Absolutely. Clearly something profound and unsettling happened to him. And the key thing is what he did immediately after.
Which was?
He went straight to his private office. And the sources state that's when he composed a prayer to St. Michael the Archangel. Right then and there.
Okay, so the timing is very direct, the experience, then the prayer. Now, you mentioned the details of the vision are tricky. This is where we rely on those secondhand accounts.
Exactly. This part is really intriguing, but we have to be careful with the sources. There isn't like an official papal document from Leo XIII himself saying, here's exactly what I saw and heard.
Right. So what do these secondhand accounts claim he saw?
Well, they come down through bishops, other clergy, people who supposedly heard it from those closer to the Pope or who saw how shaken he was. And they describe this really dramatic scene.
Go on.
Satan appearing before God.
Wow. Okay.
And in this alleged conversation, Satan is said to have boasted that he could destroy the church.
Destroy the church.
Yeah. But he supposedly added he'd need more time and, crucially, more power to actually pull it off.
Okay, so this is a boast, but also a kind of request.
Kind of. And the story continues that Christ then asked Satan, how much time?
And the answer?
According to these accounts, 100 years.
100 years, that's specific. And what was Christ's response in this alleged vision?
The reported response is quite chilling. You have the time and you will have the power. Do with them what you will.
That's incredibly stark. Almost sounds like, well, a granting of permission for a period of intense trial.
That's precisely how many have interpreted it. Not necessarily just a literal chat, but maybe a symbolic prophecy, signifying a coming century, the 20th century primarily, where evil would have stronger influence and the church, humanity, would face immense spiritual tests.
It gives a kind of framework for understanding all the turmoil that was to come.
Exactly. And flowing directly from that intense reported experience comes the prayer to St. Michael.
Which he wrote immediately. What are the key lines?
It starts, St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. lines many Catholics would recognize instantly.
And this wasn't just a personal prayer for him, was it? He mandated it.
That's right. Sources say Pope Leo ordered this prayer to be recited after every low mass, everywhere in the world.
Every low mass. So typically the quieter spoken mass without singing, that's a huge mandate. It really shows how seriously he took this perceived threat.
Immensely serious. Now, that universal requirement was relaxed later in the 1960s, around the time of Vatican II, when lots of liturgical practices were updated.
But the prayer itself didn't vanish.
Not at all. It remains incredibly popular, widely used today, especially among Catholics who feel a strong connection to tradition or just feel the need for that kind of spiritual defense.
So, okay, we have this dramatic story, possibly a vision linked to a pope, but the core details come through these later accounts. It makes sense there'd be different ways to interpret it all.
Absolutely. The sources reflect a pretty clear divide in interpretation.
What's the first main view?
Well, one major perspective takes it as a prophetic vision, a genuine glimpse into the future.
Meaning Leo literally foresaw what was coming.
Proponents of this view believe he was shown the rise of these powerful ideologies that were, explicitly hostile to the church and traditional faith.
Things like communism, fascism, Nazism, even the broader trend of secularism.
Exactly those. And they'd also point to the immense suffering of the 20th century, the world wars, genocides, the moral crises.
So for them, the chaos and spiritual struggle of the 20th century is basically the proof. That was Satan's 100 years.
That's the argument, yes. That the century unfolded just as the vision supposedly warned, showing it was a period where evil was given perhaps more leeway to test humanity.
And that ties into the next theory, doesn't it? The 100-year reign theory. If it started in 1884...
Then logically it would end 100 years later, around 1984.
Right. And do sources connect anything specific to that time frame, the mid-1980s?
They do. Some point to significant global shifts occurring around then. For instance, you start to see the cracks really appearing in Soviet communism.
A regime explicitly atheistic and known for persecuting the church?
Precisely. And at the same time, you have Pope John Paul II, who was a very outspoken opponent of communism and heavily promoted spiritual means of resistance like Marian devotion.
So people subscribing to this theory see the timing, the weakening of that atheistic power, the strong spiritual leadership, as maybe a sign that the 100 years of intense struggle were concluding or lessening.
That's the interpretation some draw from it, yes. The timing seems suggestive to them.
Okay, but then there's the other side. As you said, the vision's details aren't in Leo's own official writings, so what's the alternative perspective?
Well, the other main view, often found among, say, critical historians or those focusing strictly on documented evidence, treats the story as possibly apocryphal or allegorical.
Apocryphal meaning its historical accuracy is uncertain, like a pious legend.
Exactly. Or allegorical, meaning it's more of a symbolic story, perhaps growing out of a real spiritual experience Leo had, but one whose specific details, like the 100-year dialogue, might have developed in the telling over time.
So, not necessarily saying Leo didn't have a profound experience, but that the specific narrative we have might be more legend than fact.
Precisely. They emphasize the lack of a direct, contemporary confirmation from Leo himself about that specific conversation. For them, the value might lie less in literal history and more in how the story functions as a powerful narrative about evil and the need for vigilance.
But even if the exact story is debated, sources do suggest that many people did believe Leo had a genuine mystical moment, right? Including clergy and others close to the church?
Oh, absolutely. Regardless of whether it was a literal vision as described or a deep spiritual insight that got symbolized this way, the experience clearly impacted Pope Leo profoundly, enough to compel him to write that prayer immediately.
And its legacy definitely continues, whichever interpretation you lean towards.
It really does. I mean, the prayer to St. Michael, it's still one of the most recognized, most recited prayers in Catholicism today. Millions use it.
And the underlying theme, the ongoing struggle between good and evil, the need for spiritual alertness that hasn't faded either, has it?
Not at all. You see, even recent popes like John Paul II to Pope Francis, speaking very frankly about the reality of evil in the world and the importance of spiritual defenses, prayer.
And didn't Pope Francis specifically mention this prayer recently?
He did. Our sources note that back in 2018, amidst various crises and scandals hitting the church, Pope Francis actually urged all Catholics worldwide to start praying the St. Michael prayer again, particularly at the end of the Rosary.
Wow, so bringing it right back into focus in contemporary times.
Exactly, highlighting its perceived relevance even now.
Okay, so we've really dived deep here. We've looked at Pope Leo XIII, this dramatic reported event after Mass in 1884, the secondhand accounts of that startling conversation between Satan and Christ about a 100-year period.
The powerful prayer to St. Michael that resulted directly from it, and the different ways people have interpreted this whole episode, from prophecy fulfilled to symbolic legend.
And we've seen how both the story and the prayer continue to echo today, even getting highlighted by recent popes.
It's clear that whether you take the vision account literally or see it as powerful folklore, Pope Leo's experience, whatever its exact nature, left a lasting mark. It underscored for him, and through him for many others, a sense of ongoing spiritual struggle.
The prayer and the story behind it serve as a potent reminder, or maybe a warning, about that perceived battle between good and evil.
Definitely.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with something to think about, doesn't it? If we consider the story, whether Satan was literally granted 100 years, or if it's a metaphor for human failings and the trials of a difficult century, what does its core message about needing prayer, needing vigilance, needing faith? What does that mean for navigating the challenges, the complexity, the struggles